I had a friend named Sharon. I've got some pictures of the two of us. A couple of toddlers on the playground, or at each other's birthday parties, digging into some sheet cake, or one of us sitting patiently alongside a stack of brightly wrapped presents while the other one pries open their gifts. We went to the same preschool. I can hear the sound of crackling sand beneath the plastic wheels of those big wheel bikes. You remember those? When they'd rolled across the asphalt that was out back of the building where we used to play. We'd come up with these elaborate travel scenarios for those big wheels. One kid we played with always said that he was taking his bike to Chuck E. Cheese. Do you know I've never been to a Chuck E. Cheese? Another cultural blind spot, I guess. Sharon lived in a different town from me. It wasn't far away by any means, but we weren't in school together after that. Most of the time that we spent together was because our parents were hanging out. We spent the late 80s and early to mid 90s doing the things that you were doing as kids. Riding bikes, playing wiffle ball for hours, going on adventures in the woods, and, and recreating WWF wrestling matches in the house and breaking furniture occasionally. We'd watch marathons of The Adventures of Pete and Pete, which I would submit is one of the great TV shows of all time. Sometimes our folks would venture down to the Lower Cape, and yes, I understand that's geographically north of the other Cape Cod towns, but that's what it's called. And on a shoulder season weekend, when the tourists weren't as prevalent, we'd go to Wellfleet or Provincetown. Wellfleet is one of the last remaining drive-in movie theaters on the East Coast. On weekend mornings, there'd be a flea market in the parking lot. So Sharon and I would spot the vendors that were selling CDs and tapes and move from stall to stall looking for something decent in our price range. I'd usually be scouting for a new edition of my Van Halen collection, right? And maybe I'd come away with a solo offering from Sammy Hagar or David Lee Roth. We'd go to Provincetown and do the same thing there, wander in and out of record stores. I remember splurging on the follow-up to Soul Asylum's Grave Dancers Union. That was the album with Runaway Train on it. Well, yeah, Misery was a great song in 1995. I stand by that. And yeah, once or twice we tried to see what shop therapy was all about. I mean, that's a total if you know, you know sort of statement, right? In our previous episode, my guest Jason mentioned all the tapes that somebody made for him. And I'm trying to remember what Sharon had. Did she have the stereo set up with the CD and cassette? You'd record off the CD to the cassette, or maybe you had the double cassette and you'd record the blank tape while the other one was playing. I'm thinking back to the little rack of tapes that were on my dresser when I was a kid, and all the tapes that Sharon made for me. REM's Monster, we've already talked about that one. Also Boys to Men 2. The Batman Forever soundtrack with U2's Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me on it. The big song on that soundtrack was Kiss from a Rose by Seal. I remember Sharon's tape display on the wall in her room. All the slots got filled up, so she bought another one and set it up right next to it. I'm seeing REM's Automatic for the People, Aerosmith's Get a Grip, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Bryan Adams' stacked greatest hits collection, So Far So Good, 10,000 Maniacs, The Eagles' Hell Freezes Over. Remember when that was a big deal? And on the subject of Bryan Adams, I think she had the soundtrack to that Johnny Depp movie Don Juan DeMarco. The big single on that was Have You Ever Really Loved a Woman? So two things about that song. One, I looked it up, and that song was number one for 5 weeks in 1995. I'd totally forgotten about that. Two, the algorithm must have been listening, because I just saw a reel of John Mayer, of all people, sitting in a room with that song blasting, and he's talking about how it's the perfect song, after not hearing it for 30 years. Go figure. I remember she had Mariah Carey's Daydream. I looked that up. That came out in 95. But the musical connections for us start to fade when I look up the pop charts in 1996. And there's a reason for that. I mentioned we were friends because our parents were friends, and when our parents stopped being friends, we stopped being friends. It makes a little more sense in the context of the 90s. Again, we didn't go to school together. Neither of us had a driver's license. It would have been awkward to call over there, and the internet was this thing on a CD that you got in the mail. Neither of us had a computer. We moved on to high school. Hers was a 9-mile drive from mine, but that was just where our paths diverged. Sharon lived most of her adult life in Helena, Montana. Somewhere along the line, we reconnected on Facebook and Instagram. Something I posted about my kids or include some supportive message. Sometimes we DM with a, "Remember that thing?" We never unpacked the past, just kind of talked about the good times and went about our lives, now more than 2,000 miles apart, as the crow would fly. Think about a crow flying over scrub pine trees or acorn-filled oaks, kind of like the ones that we played beneath when we were kids, with a boombox in tow. My parents called me up in February this year, and they told me that Sharon had passed away in a tragic accident. They too had reconnected and even shared a visit a few years ago. It hurt to think about Sharon, half of her life left to live, and not getting that opportunity. It hurt to think of her friends and loved ones in her now home having her ripped out of their lives. I thought back to our friendship, the high spots, but also how it ended with such a whimper 3 decades ago. I watched her celebration of life on YouTube. I heard how she was appreciated in her community and was the kind of person who worked tirelessly for others. That wasn't a surprise. I dug out the photos in the jumbled box of assorted childhood pictures I've yet to categorize. I went into those DMs. And going through the really sparse exchanges that we'd had over the past decade, she told me, "You were my best friend." I hadn't realized that, and even when she typed it in 2017, I just took it as a nice thing for somebody to say. We moved on to talking about our adventures, the WWF matches, the broken furniture, kept things light. The more I thought about it, Sharon was my best friend. I was lucky to have her. She was a bright spot in an otherwise miserable middle school experience that lasted 5 years, 4th grade to 8th grade in the same building. Whose idea was that? Maybe you and I had different experiences growing up. Maybe you were on the other side of the coin, or maybe you're listening to this and saying, "Yeah, I get it. I wasn't cool back then. I got beat up sometimes. Some of the problems I had, I'd probably made worse just by being myself. But I had Sharon. That was huge. And I really hope that everybody could be lucky enough to have a friend like that. If I could talk to her, I'd tell her how much she meant to me. How a braver or more resourceful, younger version of myself would have fought for that friendship. Circumstances we couldn't control, but maybe there's something I could have done. Or how in later years I appreciated the love hearts on the pictures of my kids. Or how I recently started a music podcast, and she's one of the people who comes to mind every episode. And I can imagine as time goes by, I'm going to keep thinking of the things that I should have told her, that I'll never get the chance to tell her. So I'm telling you, you should know. Sharon was a good person and a wonderful friend, and she meant a lot to me. Music by Ceramic, from their EP, Somebody Like That. You can subscribe to Cracked Rear View on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube. I'm Sean Silver.
Drive home.